So let's start with a really big question. Can you actually know something is true without ever, seeing it or hearing it or touching it? It's a fundamental question, right? And today we're going to dive into a philosophical concept that tries to get to the bottom of it, digging right into the foundations of how we think.
The concept we're talking about is called a priori knowledge. Now, I know, it's a Latin phrase, sounds a little intimidating, maybe a bit academic, but trust me, stick with me on this one. Because this idea is absolutely key to understanding both the limits and, honestly, the incredible power of our own reason.
All right, so first things first, we've got to get a handle on what this actually means. What does it even mean to have knowledge before experience? Let's take a look at the textbook definition. So, in modern philosophy, a priori knowledge is basically stuff you can figure out just by thinking. You don't need to go out and do an experiment, you just need the logic inside your own head. A classic example is 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? You don't need to get 2 apples and then 2 more apples to prove it, you just know it. Or how about this one? All bachelors are unmarried. The truth of that statement is baked right into the definition of the word bachelor. You don't have to go interview a bunch of guys to check if it's true. It's knowledge that comes from pure reason, not from anything your senses tell you. Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. The meaning of this term has done a complete 180 over the centuries. Originally, a priori was all about the direction of an argument. You'd reason from a known cause, like, say, gravity, to an effect, like an apple falling. It was about how logic flows. But the modern meaning? It's not about the argument anymore. It's about us. It's about the source of our knowledge. It's a huge shift from talking about logic out there in the world to talking about how our own minds are wired. So, who's the person responsible for this massive shift in thinking? Well, that would be the one and only Immanuel Kant, an 18th century philosopher. He took this old idea of a priori and completely repurposed it to build this really a revolutionary new model for how the human mind actually works. And Kant came up with this brilliant analogy to explain it, which is just perfect for our digital age. He basically said, think of your mind like a computer with an operating system. All day long, your senses, your eyes, your ears, are just throwing raw data at it, just a chaotic jumble of sights and sounds. So how does your brain turn all that noise into something that makes sense? Well, according to Kant, it uses its pre-installed software, its a priori reason. So for Kant, knowledge isn't just one thing or the other. It's a mashup, a synthesis of both. You've got the mind's a priori operating system, with these built-in programs for understanding things like space, time, and causality. Then you have the a posteriori data, and that's just a fancy way of saying data from experience, from your senses. The OS takes all that raw data and organizes it into what we call knowledge. And you absolutely need both. You can't have one without the other. Without your senses, your brain would have nothing to process. But without that built-in reason, everything would just be a chaotic, meaningless blur. Now, this leads to a pretty mind-bending idea from Kant. He basically splits reality in two. On one side, you have what he called the phenomenal world. That's the world as we experience it, the world that our mental operating system is neatly organized for us. But then there's the noumenal world. This is reality as it actually is, the thing in itself, totally independent of our perception. And here's the real kicker. Kant says we can never know that world. It is completely, fundamentally unknowable to us.
Whoa!
Okay, so Kant gives us this really elegant system, right? Reason and experience working hand in hand. It's nice. It's tidy. But what if it's completely wrong? To even consider that, we have to jump in our philosophical time machine and go way, way back, long before Kant, to ancient Greece. Because there was a group of thinkers there, the Eleatics, who had a totally radical and completely challenging view of all this. Their main guy was a philosopher named Parmenides, and he started with a rule that sounds almost obvious. He said, you cannot think or speak of what is not. Simple, right? You can't really talk about nothing because, well, it's nothing. But this one seemingly simple idea had absolutely explosive consequences for everything that followed. Starting from that one little rule, Parmenides said we're at a fork in the road. There are two paths we can take. The first is the way of truth. This is the path of pure, hardcore logic. And if you follow it to its conclusion, you realize that being, all of reality, has to be one single, eternal, and totally unchanging thing. Then there's the other path, the way of opinion. This is the path of our senses. It's the world we see every day, full of change, motion, and variety. But for Parmenides, that was all just a big, fat illusion, a contradiction. So when faced with this ultimate showdown between logic and his own senses, he went all in on logic.
He chose reason over the evidence of his own eyes. Pretty wild.
And believe it or not, this ancient argument sets up an epic showdown that is still so relevant today. It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question about the very tool we're using to even think about all this stuff. And that question is logic itself truly neutral? I mean, did the Eleatics basically invent the art of logic as we know it? You could definitely make that argument. Historically, guys like Parmenides were the first to really build these rigorous, step-by-step logical proofs to make these huge claims about reality, while telling their senses to take a hike. They pretty much invented the whole game of dialectical argument. Or did they just discover something that was already there? This is what Kant would say. From his point of view, the Eleatics didn't invent anything. They were just the first people to really discover and start using these universal rules of reason, the a priori software that's already built into every single human mind. And this gets us right to the heart of the whole conflict. It boils down to this. Is logic the foundation of a specific worldview, or is it just a tool that any worldview can use? Is it the specific software that only runs one program, or is it a neutral operating system that can run anything you throw at it? Let's lay this out really clearly. On the one hand, you have the Kantian view. For Kant, logic is a totally neutral tool. It's a precondition for thought. It's the set of rules you have to have in place before you can even start building a worldview. But the Eleatic view is the complete opposite. They'd say logic is a product of your metaphysics, your deepest beliefs about what reality is. For them, the rules of logic are a consequence of their worldview. It's what comes after you've already decided what's real, not before. And look, this isn't just some dusty, abstract debate for philosophers. This conflict gets right to the heart of how we all think, every single day. It's about that exact moment you make a judgment. That moment you decide, yep, that's true. It forces us to ask, what has to already be in place before we can claim to know, well, anything? Really, what we're seeing here is a clash between two major branches of philosophy. You've got epistemology, which is all about the theory of knowledge. It asks, how do we know stuff? And then you have ontology, which is the study of being. It asks, what is real? Now, Kant tried really hard to separate these two. He wanted to focus just on the how we know part. But the Eleatics would have said, no way, you can't do that. For them, the two are completely linked. You can't separate them, because what is real is what ultimately decides how you can know it. Which brings us to a powerful Latin phrase that just sums up this whole challenge perfectly. Scientia sine juditio impossibilis. Knowledge without judgment is impossible. And that leaves us with a final, and honestly a pretty unsettling question to chew on. That very act of judgment, the fundamental tool we use to build every single piece of knowledge we have, is it a neutral, universal operating system that anyone can use? Or is it a deep-seated belief about reality itself? A belief we have to commit to before we can even begin to think?